The Wizard of Oz. It's a timeless children's story, but some see L. Frank Baum's original story as a social satire. Dorothy, your typical American. A brainless scarecrow? Farmers. A tin man with no heart? Industry. A cowardly lion? Politicians. You know what I see, though? I mean, it's obvious. It's an allegory of antifungals. Don't believe me? Get out that old Dark Side of the Moon record, wait for the third lion roar, and follow me. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful wizard of Azoles. Azoles include the imidazoles ketoconazole, miconazole, and clotrimazole, as well as the triazoles, itraconazole, fluconazole, and voriconazole. The spectrum of action of the azole drugs is broad, so we'll cover important clinical indications as we go through each individual drug. Let's cover mechanism of action first. Like we mentioned in the amphotericin sketch, the cell membrane of fungi is composed of ergosterol, not cholesterol, and antifungal drugs often exploit this difference. Ergosterol will be represented by the building blocks comprising the perimeter of the emerald city. Think emerald ergosterol, just like the fungal cell membrane. Notice, too, that the emerald city even has a postmodern fungal architectural design. The antifungal activity of azole drugs results from the inhibition of ergosterol synthesis from lanosterol. So we'll sketch in some munchkin builders bringing ergosterol materials to the Emerald City wall. And we all know the story from there. Dorothy, after her house is picked up by the tornado, murders the first person she meets in the land of Azoles. Notice, her house has landed right in the middle of the Yellow Brick Road, crushing one of the Emerald City workers. Probably unionized in some kind of workers' guild, too. The Yellow Brick Road is closed, as indicated by this lane closed sign. Think of lane closed as lanosterol, unable to turn into ergosterol. Specifically, azoles hold the enzyme that turns lanosterol into ergosterol, fungal cytochrome P450. And if you take a look under the house, it's none other than our recurring cytochrome chrome bumper with CYP450 license plate attached to the back of a carriage, destroyed by yet another unreported workplace accident at the Emerald City. So, azoles halt the production of ergosterol from lanosterol by inhibiting cytochrome enzymes, while azoles exhibit higher affinity for fungal rather than human cytochrome P450 enzymes. All azole drugs are prone to drug interactions because they affect mammalian cytochrome enzymes to some extent. So remember these drug interactions for all the azoles covered in this scene. Voriconazole, especially, is a clinically relevant inhibitor of mammalian cytochrome P450. This makes sense in our scene because voriconazole is symbolized by a vortex, or tornado. That same tornado that dropped Dorothy's house on the cytochrome carriage in the first place. So, when voriconazole therapy is started, dose reduction of a number of medications is required, including the cytochrome P450 substrates, cyclosporine, tacrolimus, and statins. A unique adverse reaction to voriconazole is visual disturbances. Blurry vision or flashes of light are a common but transient reaction and are represented here by these blurry flashes of light within the tornado. Changes in color vision can also occur. And that's why the tornado is traveling through a completely sepia-toned rural landscape. Voriconazole is a drug of choice for invasive aspergillosis. We'll sketch in the scarecrow guy to remind you of the scarecrow in our sketchy micro-aspergillus sketch. Let his hyphae-like strands remind you of the invasive hyphae of aspergillosis. And he's coughing because he aspirated dust from the vortex. The hay bursting from his lungs represents systemic aspergillosis. If he only had a brain, he would probably have a brain aspergilloma as well. This rural scene does not take place in Kansas this time, but Canada, because Canada is our recurring sketchy theme for Candida. Voriconazole has excellent activity against Candida species and is useful for treating Candida esophagitis in patients with AIDS. Well, as you can see, we're not in Canada anymore. So let's move on to fluconazole, the agent most commonly used for treatment of mucocutaneous candidiasis. Fluconazole will be represented by flying monkeys. Again, we have the Canada flag. But now that we're in the land of azoles, it's in stunning technicolor. Unusual weather we're having, ain't it? Think of these patches of snow as the easily scraped off patches of Candida yeast infection on mucous membranes. Fluconazole has excellent activity against Candida species and is used as a one-time dose to treat vaginal candidiasis, as shown by this flying monkey getting pelted in the nether regions. Just one dose necessary there. Fluconazole is also used for the treatment of Candida stomatitis and, when given IV, esophagitis in AIDS patients, as represented here by the snow collecting in these esophagus-like gutters. Remember that Candida esophagitis requires systemic antifungal therapy. It should never be managed with local agents. These statues are adorning the top of a crypt. My guess is for the Wicked Witch of the East, to remind you that fluconazole is the agent of choice for treatment and prophylaxis of cryptococcal meningitis. In fact, fluconazole is used for lifelong maintenance therapy, and that's why it's represented by these statues, permanent fixtures guarding this crypt. I really want to emphasize its high levels of CNS penetration, so the flying monkeys will be wearing the recurring red meningitis mohawk helmets. Fluconazole has some activity against the dimorphic fungi, but mainly against coccidioidal meningitis. So let's move on to the drug of choice for treating dimorphic fungi, itraconazole. Itraconazole is represented by the good witch reconazole. Notice that the good witch has butterfly wings. This is because in Sketchy Micro, our dimorphic fungi, the ones that change from yeast to mold when causing systemic infection, are associated with a butterfly, which is a dimorphic creature that morphs from a caterpillar. The good witch is seen here casting butterflies to cure Dorothy's systemic mycoses, namely histoplasmosis, blastomycosis, and coccidioidomycosis. And don't forget sporothrix. Probably something she picked up at the farm. Remember, itraconazole for those fungi with two iterations, in other words, dimorphic fungi. She's also touching her cone wand to the toes of Dorothy's ruby slippers. Well, not really ruby this time, but kind of black, to remind you of itraconizole's extensive use in the treatment of onychomycosis. It's also used to treat dermatophytes. In fact, many azoles have activity against those pesky dermatophytes that cause the tinea infections such as tinea corporis. We'll highlight some of the topical agents here, next to our Tin Man. When you see the Tin Man, think tinea. See the characteristic ring-like rust rash? Topical agents include clotrimazole and miconazole, often administered as a cream. So next to our tinea Tin Man, we have our Cowardly Lion getting a nice close trim, clotrimazole. And hugging onto his pine cone metal he was duped into thinking gives him courage. "It's my cone," he says. "My conazole." Remember, miconazole and clotrimazole are topical agents for treating tinea. They are also topical agents used to treat vaginal candidiasis. What? Okay, that just happened, I guess. Again, getting pelted in the groin to represent treatment of vaginal yeast infection. Uncalled for. The last azole included in this sketch is ketoconazole. It's available as a cream to treat cutaneous dermatophytosis, such as tinea corporis. And that's why our tinea Tin Man is holding this key with the pine cone keychain. Ketoconazole is not usually used as a systemic agent because the other azoles have a much better safety profile. Ketoconazole has a greater propensity to inhibit mammalian cytochrome P450, for example. One important adverse effect we will highlight is the inhibition of adrenal steroid production, as well as gonadal synthesis of androgens and estrogens. Notice this key is fitting into a lock that looks like a kidney, with the bolt at the top representing the triangle adrenal gland. Think of ketoconazole as locking the adrenal gland. Specifically, it inhibits the first step of steroid synthesis from cholesterol, 1720 desmolase. If you look behind the locked vents, it's none other than the Wicked Witch of the West, of course. She is at her cauldron synthesizing steroid hormones. She's throwing in a basic cholesterol structure and is hoping to create some androgens and estrogens, represented by the male and female symbols. Also, the moon face should evoke an image of the moon facies that can occur in Cushing's disease when ketoconazole can be used to help curb an otherwise overproduction of adrenal cortisol. So remember that ketoconazole puts a lock on steroid synthesis. And put it on that list of drugs that causes anti-androgenic side effects, such as gynecomastia. All right, let's sum up this sketch. Remember that the Emerald City is composed of ergosterol. Azoles work by inhibiting ergosterol synthesis from lanosterol. This is by inhibiting fungal cytochrome P450. Many azoles are prone to drug interactions because of this CYP450 inhibition. Voriconazole is a drug of choice for invasive aspergillosis, as represented by the vortex next to our hyphae-ridden scarecrow. Remember, we're not in Kansas, we're in Canada. Our symbol for candidiasis coverage with voriconazole and fluconazole. Our fluconazole flying monkeys demonstrate treatment of mucocutaneous infection such as vaginal candidiasis and systemic infection such as esophageal candidiasis. They don the red meningitis helmets because of excellent CNS penetration, especially important when treating cryptococcal meningitis, for which fluconazole can be used as lifelong maintenance therapy. Itraconazole is our good witch with butterfly wings representing dimorphic fungi such as histo, blasto, and coccidioidomycosis. Artinia tinman depicts topical treatments such as clotrimazole, miconazole, and ketoconazole. Remember that ketoconazole is like a key locking the adrenal, preventing steroid synthesis. Now, hover your cursor over the next button. Close your eyes. Tap your heels together 3 times and think to yourself, there's no place like Canada. 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 There's no place like Canada.